Hey guys, so in today's video, I'm going to show you how you could actually reduce your database costs by using CloudFlare, while at the same time not having to change your front end or your back end implementation. What I'll do is I'm going to show you how you could use CloudFlare Workers. We're going to introduce Fair Key Value product, and we're going to put a cache layer in place. And then what I'll do is I'll show you how it works, how you could actually get the benefits of this, and more importantly, how you could actually save your database costs. Because one of the things that we've learned over time is that database is actually really expensive. So any single thing that you could do to save costs on your database, that's what we're going to be focusing on in this video. So if you're interested, stick around and let's jump right into it. By the way, if you don't know me, my name is Dwain and I'm basically a startup founder, and this channel, I focus on CloudFlare, AI productivity tools for developers, basically. So if you're a technical founder or you're into just the startup world, or you're just an entrepreneur and you just want to learn how you could actually sort of scale up with CloudFlare, or just learn sort of ways to improve your business, that's what I do on this channel. So with that, if you're interested, get some value out of this, please like and subscribe. With that, let's just jump right into it. Okay, so before we jump into it, I want to do is just take a step back and actually talk about why would you actually want to introduce a caching layer, and more importantly, why would you want to use CloudFlare to do this? Now, the goal in this video is to not change your existing code. Now, while that's a goal, you don't necessarily have to not change your code. In the perfect world, you would actually change your code and implement it in your existing code. However, the goal of this video is to kind of show you how you would accomplish the same thing without having to change either your front end or your back end. So neither of them actually knows that this change has been implemented, but you can still reap the benefits of reducing the amount of data going to your database. So let me just show you what I mean, and I'll show you with a diagram altogether. So let's say you got a front end of some sort. Doesn't matter. This could be a .NET application all the way to a Next.js application, or any single thing in between, an HTML page. And it's calling sort of your API. Okay. Your API, more or less, be talking to some sort of database in the backend. Doesn't matter whether it's SQL, Postgres, MongoDB, doesn't really matter. Okay. So this is a typical setup altogether. Now, the problem with databases and cloud vendors, etc., is that you have to pay for performance. So with that, if I have more traffic going to my backend, I have to pay extra for that traffic. And so if my database can't keep up with load, normally what you would have to do is kind of scale up your database in order to meet that demand. And essentially what you're doing is you're paying for performance. Okay. So with that, the problem is that database, just by the nature of how they are set up, are just expensive. They're really expensive. You could find cheap solutions out there, but for the most part, if you're in the cloud, AWS or Google or Microsoft Azure, database is just expensive. That's just a reality. Two things. Number one is you want to be able to scale your front end without hitting your database for every single request. I'll give you a real example of that. Okay, so what I did is actually logged into a dummy website which has dummy data. This is dummy data, so Google, do not take down my video. I have to say that because YouTube, for some reason, they see phone numbers and they think they just want to take down my video. This is all generated dummy data. Basically, every single time I navigate to a page, I want to show you a real world example of what would happen. Every time I navigate to a page, for example, see here, these drop downs have to load. If I navigate to this page here, you see it, these drop downs here have to load. So it's actually unnecessary for you to have to keep loading these drop downs all the time, because it's the same information 90% of the time is going to be loaded. So essentially what you want to be able to do is you want to be able to cache all that details, and then maybe even cache this record here, but you want to hit the database whenever there's fresh data. Okay, that's the goal, and that's what we're going to solve. So let's just jump back into the diagram so we can talk about it a little bit more. So as you can see from that basic implementation that I just showed you, every single time you load a page, you would have to make multiple requests in order to get those drop down loaded. And so that's basically what you're doing. But essentially what you're doing is you're unnecessarily loading your database with just tons of requests that could be cached. So the goal is, if you can reduce the amount of data that is you're calling your database because you're caching it, you would be able to reap the benefits of not having to have as large of a database. You could basically keep the database small, which means that you could reduce your costs. So what the goal is, you're going to basically try to introduce some sort of caching layer, in this case, CloudFlare key value. So we're going to introduce a CloudFlare key value storage. And what we're going to do is whenever the request comes in, we're going to send the data to the CloudFlare key value storage. We're going to check to see if we have that data inside of the system. And if we do, then we're just going to return to the user. If we don't, then we're going to basically make a round trip to the database, get that data. And then on our way back out, what we're going to do is we're going to go save that data into key value store, and then we're going to return to the user. So now the question becomes, well, how can you actually accomplish this without having to change your existing infrastructure, change your existing code? So that's what we're going to talk about. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is we want to actually introduce CloudFlare into the mix. We haven't done any single change to our front end, nor have we changed any single thing to our back end. The only thing we're doing is we're going to use CloudFlare as our DNS provider. So all of the traffic goes through CloudFlare, and I'm going to show you how you actually do this. But for now, just know that your DNS is going to be pointing, you're going to change your DNS record and you're going to have it pointing to CloudFlare. Now, if you're watching this, you probably already have that in place, but let's just talk about the benefits of that. The benefit is that CloudFlare has a global network, and what they're able to do is sort of inspect and monitor your traffic ahead of time, so that in the event that there's a problem, somebody's trying to hack your website or whatever, they would actually prevent or block that attack ahead of time, right? So all of your traffic is just going to route through CloudFlare's network. So that's number one. CloudFlare will do its inspection stuff if you pay for their sort of like security tier or whatever, but you also get some things for free at the tier, but we're not here to talk about that. And then what CloudFlare is basically going to do is just going to basically forward your traffic to your API. So you haven't changed anything in terms of your code. All you're doing is just routing your traffic through CloudFlare, and arguably is significantly faster than sort of like going directly to where you're going right now because of CloudFlare's global network. Okay, so now that we have the CloudFlare network in place, the goal will be is that now I've kind of increased the diagram a little bit just to kind of give you a little bit more details, because we're going to talk about the cacher layer, but where you see this Azure Functions, just picture it as your API. Okay, so what we have here is we have the data coming from your app going to CloudFlare DNS network, and like I said, it could be inspected, and then it's going to go from there to your application, and then from your application to the database. What we're doing now is we're going to go into CloudFlare and we're going to set up a rule. And the rule will be that we're going to monitor for certain endpoints. Okay. In this particular case, because we're doing the drop downs, as I showed you, right? We're going to monitor any traffic that has API/UX/drop down. This is just my application's convention for drop downs. Okay. So it's going to look for any single thing like that. And then it's going to say, if you find a URL that has that request, what I want you to do is I want you to route that to my business rule. What I want you to do is route that to my business rule. Okay. Basically, what that rule will do is say any traffic that has that path in that query string, I want you to forward the traffic to a CloudFlare worker. Okay. And this is how we're going to get around having to actually change our code, because we haven't actually introduced any sort of code change. All we're doing is just inspecting the traffic as it comes in with CloudFlare's network. We write a rule that says, hey, I want you to forward this traffic based on this query string to my worker altogether. And the worker will do exactly what the function was doing, just slightly different. It's going to do two things. One is that it's going to take the URL, and I'm simplifying it. It's going to basically go look into your cache to see if you have that information already. And if you do, then it's just going to return that straight to the user right away. Okay. So that's one. Now, if you actually don't have that data, it's just going to forward it to your endpoint, to your function. Okay. It's not going to try to go to the database and do any of that complicated stuff, because then you would just be replicating code. It's just literally going to just say, you know what? I don't have this data, so I'm just going to forward it on to the endpoint. And in that way, it's going to forward it back to your API, and your application on the front end is none the wiser. It actually knows nothing of the fact that the data is being inspected on the back end, and your backend data does not know any single thing that your traffic is actually being inspected. Okay. Now there's a little bit of details that I'm kind of skipping over here for the security people. You know, there's some headers that might change and stuff like that. So that has to be adjusted, but I'm just want to make sure that you kind of understand sort of the high level concept of what's going on first. And then we're going to try to dive into the details a little bit more. So hopefully that kind of gives you sort of a good overview and it makes a little bit of sense. Now, the question is, why would you want to do this? Okay. And we've already talked about the fact that there's performance, or you could really cut down your costs of your database. But the other reason is that this is just really, really fast. Okay. So if you don't have to go back to your database every single time, you get some significant speed. And then depending on where you are globally, right? There's a key value storage that's basically almost like directly next to you. So it's going to just go back really, really fast altogether. And that just will dramatically improve the performance of your application. In addition to making sure that your application is responsive, it's also going to offset a lot of the responsibility in you having to set up your own caching system and then change your code in order to be able to sort of implement a new caching system for performance. So this really just takes off a lot of the headache of you having to sort of change your existing code. And that's the key word here that I really wanted you to take away. Now, there's also a couple of benefits here that we really want to talk about. This is not for every single use case, but there are a couple of use cases where this is really good. If you have any single thing like drop-downs, settings, any sort of configuration, things that you don't have to necessarily go back to the database all the time, right? That's really fantastic for. Anything where it's not changing too frequently. Now, if you're doing a lot of heavy writes, this is not necessarily the best implementation because you just won't really get the benefit of it. But if you're doing lots of read, then yes, 100% absolutely recommend this for you. Now, I'm going to show you a trick that you could use in order to properly implement this without having to change your code. One of the problems that you're going to run into is how do you actually invalidate the cache so that you could get the fresh data. I'll show you what I mean by that. Okay, so let's just say that so you got some data, it came in here, and then basically it, obviously you went to your business rule, and then from your business rule, you went to the key value pair, and then it turns out that we actually have that data in our key value pair. Okay, so we have data in our key value, and we were able to return that successfully to the user. So no problems there. We're already familiar with this. Okay, now let's just say that in your application, somebody made a change, and that change specifically to that particular record. Right? It's a create, it's update. They made some change to the record itself. How do you basically invalidate the cache, which is a big problem altogether? Okay. So there's two ways that you could do it. Number one is you could add a code change to your application to basically tell it, hey, whenever you see this particular request, right, I want you to send a request to the cache and then clear the cache. The problem with this is that, again, you're going to run into an issue where you have to change your code, and that's perfectly fine. In fact, it is kind of the recommended approach. However, you can do the exact same thing and monitor for specific endpoints that you want to target. And then when that traffic is coming in as an update or a create or whatever, do the exact same thing and run it through CloudFlare. And I'll give you sort of a framework that you could use in order to think, because the number one important thing here is that whatever that data is, you need to be able to generate a specific key so that you can basically go find that record in the application. Because the way how the key value pair works is that basically there's a key. Okay, let's call it 1, 2, 3 in this particular case. That's the key. And then the value will be your data. Let's say it's a list of cars or something like that, right? So your value is that, okay? So what you need is you need 100% that this key is always the same for the data that you're trying to remove or add, if that makes sense. The way that I've been thinking about this in order to kind of get this right is, number one is you could use the query string that you're actually using to get that data is unique. Okay. So let's just say that you're looking for drop down number 1 or drop down number 2, then that query string you can use to then generate a hash, which could be used to then create a key, if that makes sense. So a hash is basically just a string. Let me just show you what I mean. So let's say that you got this query string here, and the query string is API1 ID XYZ. Okay. You would use this part in the worker. So you would basically extract that part in the worker. And what you would do is you would just compute a hash. And if you don't know, a hash is basically just a cryptographic, think of it as it generates a unique string based on a unique value. Okay. So in this particular case, this is a unique value. So if I pass this through the hash algorithm, it's going to give me this number every single time. If I change this number by 1 letter, it's going to give me a completely different hash. Okay. That's basically the concept there. So as long as you can generate the same URL and pass it into the application to generate a hash, then you could use that hash as your actual key. Okay. And that's how you'd basically think. So this way you can generate a unique key for every single unique URL. Now, let's say in the case with the update, right? So this is ID 123. You can do the exact same thing on the update. Now you might have to do this through a different worker, but let's just say, let me just copy this. What's going on? Oh, it's pasting. I see what's going on. Right. So let's say that this URL here, let's say it was update as an example. Okay. Let's say it was an update and you're doing the action is a put or post. This is an API verb that basically represents you're doing an update. And inside of the application, you would have the ID 123, right? You could use this in order to generate your hash. So with the GET request, you would maybe say use the ID equals this and use that to generate your hash. And in the POST request, you would just basically extract this and use that to generate your hash. Does that make any sense? The point is you just need to be able to generate a unique hash for the thing that you're trying to update or put into cache so that you could guarantee that if I'm updating it or I'm trying to request it, that I'm going to get the same hash, which is what I'm going to use as my key in order to store the data. Okay. So with that, let me just show you what that looks like. So this is a very simple example of CloudFlare Worker, and basically you would get a request would come into the worker. You would access it by saying environment.key value. This is how you could access the key value pair. And then this is how you would add it to the key value pair, literally like that. So in this particular case, this here would be your key. Let me copy this code and go back to this, right? And then let's pretend that, oh, did I pull it? Right. So this key here, let's just say that key would be here, and then the value would be whatever list you have, right? Okay. And then obviously on the return, you would do the exact same thing. Now there's a couple gotcha with doing this entire approach, and let's just jump right into the code so I could just talk about it a little bit more in depth. So this code here does pretty much the exact same thing that we just kind of talked about, except that it's just doing a little bit more. Why? Because you might have a URL that when it comes into your code, you might not necessarily want to cache. Okay. So what I have here is I have a config that has a bunch of URLs that are allowed cache. So in other words, even though I'm passing all of the /API/UX, UX just stands for user experience, and then drop down /technician/ whatever, I might only want to cache some of them, but then there's others, for example, like /UX/real-time status, I don't want to cache, or live inventory, I don't necessarily want to cache. So I just basically added an allowed URL to cache and exclude URL to cache. This way, when I'm doing my caching, what I could do is I could just basically check to see, hey, am I allowed to cache this or not? And then from there, if I am allowed to cache this, then I would basically get a hash key. I would basically take the data, save it into the cache, and I would continue the entire process altogether. So that's just something that you just want you to think about as you're kind of doing it. And then obviously you would just return the data as it is. Otherwise, you would basically just forward the requests to whatever the target is. Okay. That's kind of like the general gist of things. Let me see if there's anything else I'm missing here. So here, see, I have generate cache key. Like I said, all this does is basically just composes, in my particular case, is composing, because it's a multi-tenant application, it's composing both the action and the tenant ID, getting that exact same key. And then from there, it's using that to basically generate the key. Okay, so with that, the only thing that you need to do is basically just go into Cloudflare, assuming that you have it pointing to Cloudflare name servers. The only thing you need to do is basically go into your Cloudflare, and you need to just ensure that whatever URL it is that you have, so in your DNS, so let's just say your DNS record was something like API, in my case is api.dwain.me, okay? And it was pointing to your website app.api or something like that, whatever API it was pointing to, okay? So let's just say that that was my API. The only thing you need to do to start making this work is basically enable this proxy. Once you have the proxy enabled, then this allows, like I said, Cloudflare to inspect your traffic. If you turn this off, then Cloudflare will just treat it as a DNS. It just forwards things straight. It doesn't go through its network, or it does, but it doesn't necessarily inspect the traffic. But once you have it set as a proxy, it will basically inspect the traffic altogether. Okay. And then you're not going to, and I repeat, you're not going to go to Cloudflare's caching. This is a completely different implementation for what I'm talking about. This is more like think of it like a sort of like a broad application cache implementation. It's not as fine grained. You do have some caching rules in here, but that's not what we're doing. What you're going to do is you're going to go into rules. You're going to create a brand new rule, and then you're going to click on redirect rule, and you're going to give it the name API redirect. And then you're going to say a particular filter. So custom filter as in this particular case. And you could basically just set the URL as a path. So basically if there's a path, and then you could say /API/UX/dropdown in my particular case. So any single thing that matches this path, I want you to redirect to this particular URL. Okay. And here, what you're going to do is you're going to put in your Cloudflare worker. So, okay, we're going to leave it as a tier 1 redirect. And basically, so that traffic as it's coming in is going to redirect to my Cloudflare worker altogether. Once I deploy that, and I deploy my Cloudflare worker to this URL, then the Cloudflare worker will be responsible for basically inspecting the traffic, rerouting it back into the main application itself. So this is basically just how you could do it. Now there's other options here that you could go into. You could check it by the URL or by the query string for a specific query string, or you could do it by even things as country. It just goes on and on in terms of the options that you have, right? You could look for specific headers, HTTP headers, etc. So there's a few options here on how you could sort of like take that traffic, inspect it, and then just kind of reroute it, right? And like I said, once you reroute it to your worker is going to basically inspect it, either return back to the user and or forward it to the API, get the data, and then basically return it back to the URL thing. Now, there's one other thing I want you to kind of be aware of when you're implementing this. There's something called CX wait until. And what this allows you to do is actually really cool if you understand sort of the implementation of it. So what the wait until will allow you to do is actually to take the traffic, send it into your rule, send it out to the Cloudflare worker. And then what it can do automatically is if it has a cache, let's say it has a cache, but the cache is old or it's outdated, it could basically take that and then return it to the user immediately. Okay. So slightly outdated information. And while it sent that information out, it will still in the background go to the Cloudflare, your function, get the latest data, and then basically input it back into the cache. And this way that's happening in the background. So the user gets a request immediately. However, the information is still a little bit stale, right? So that's one way you could do it. Or the other way that you could use that option is whenever you get a request, you could always send the information back to the user immediately. And then you can make a separate call to your function, get the data, and then compare that to whatever is in your cache. If it's different, then you swap the data out, right? So there's a couple ways that you can kind of use that wait until, but I just wanted to bring that to your attention because it's actually a really, really powerful tool. It allows you to do some background jobs without having to sort of necessarily have your function kind of wait on that job to think. So that's why it's called a wait until. So highly, really, really powerful implementation. Definitely recommend that you check it out for sure. By the way, if you're getting any value from this, please subscribe to the channel. I'm trying to grow this channel up. Hopefully you get some value out of this. If you want to know more details about this or you want to actually see actual working code, let me know. I'm trying to sort of balance sort of like show and tell versus actually writing actual code. So overall, what's the goal and what's the mission here? The mission is, like I said, is to reduce the cost on your database. I've been able to significantly reduce my overall cost on my database expenditure just by implementing some of these features. The cool thing is you don't have to do too much implementation on your code. Now, there is a caveat here, as I mentioned before, is that you do have to think about some of the security implementation here because the headers do change and you have to think about that. So that might affect your backend. So there's a few things that you do have to think about. So make sure that you test this properly in sort of like a dev environment first before you actually push it to production. Shouldn't have to tell you that, but just make sure that you do that all together. All right. And then, like I said, if you are getting some value, please subscribe to the channel. I'm going to be putting out more videos on this type of stuff. So stick around and we're going to see you in the next video. Have yourself a wonderful day. Bye.